I think is a very timely moment. And I am going to talk to you today about what has been my passion project. I'm an academic, but also very much interested in actually realizing social change for a just and sustainable world. And I'm going to just share my a little bit about this the project that Fabian talked about called "You Matter More Than You Think: Quantum Social Change for a Thriving World." And let me just share on and can you see the slides now? Great. Yeah, so this is really has been over the last 12 years or so, something that has really engaged me. And when someone says, "Would you like to talk about it?" I'm very enthusiastic about it. And I'm going to show you some slides and walk you through like kind of the narrative of the book, ending on how this can actually be translated into a fractal approach to scaling transformations to sustainability. And the artwork is all from Norwegian artist Tone Bjørdam, and so that's where I really kind of just illustrate the points in this. But in my research, the question that really like drives me is how do we transform at the rate, the scale, the speed, and the depth that is called for to successfully respond to multiple crises, including climate change and biodiversity loss? And this is a really important question, but it is not just how do we do it, but how do we do this in an ethical, equitable, and sustainable manner. And this is really important because the quality of change matters. And I think that what strikes me and many people that I talk to is this idea of, can we make a difference? Can I make a difference? And I think like a lot of us just go like, do I actually matter? Can we change the world individually and collectively? So that really led me on to this inquiry, and including this question that started to bubble up in me. And as I started to learn about quantum social science and different paradigms for looking at human nature relationships. See, are we underestimating our individual and collective capacity for social change? Because if we are, then we just are actually, we're not moving the needle on anything, and we're not actually taking advantage and unleashing the agency that we have for social change. So that led to this book called You Matter More Than You Think, where I describe quantum social change as a conscious, nonlinear, and non-local approach to transformations that's grounded in our inherent oneness. So this is a relational approach that recognizes that we are entangled through language, through meaning, through shared contexts, and also through our deepest values and our intentions, which are the potential sources of individual change, collective change, and systems change. So seeing those all together is, I think, really an important aspect of this. And this is really about a paradigm shift in the way we think about social change. And paradigms, they can be defined as a set of concepts or metaphors or thought patterns that underline like the theories and methods of science, but also how we organize society. And systems thinker Donella Meadows, in her Leverage Points article on places to intervene in a system, calls paradigms one of the highest leverage points, besides being recognizing that that all paradigms are just paradigms. But she says that paradigms are the sources of systems. From them, from shared social agreements about the nature of reality, come system goals and information flows, feedbacks, stocks, flows, and everything else about system. And this is why I think we really need to, at this time, be working on from a level of paradigms, whether it's about paradigms for education, paradigms for philanthropy, paradigms for social change. And most of our work in society now, especially Western societies, is based on a Cartesian Newtonian paradigm that is reductionist, atomistic, deterministic, and it really like draws this line between me and you, between us and others, between subjects and objects, between humans and natures, and it really is, it perpetuates this this idea that we are separate from each other, from nature, and it doesn't take into account past, present, and future in time. And so what we get then is a fragmented society. We get a polarized society. We get a society where we do not actually take care of the whole at all. And it's more that be the sharp thing. And I think this is visible to everybody now. And And this is where quantum physics comes in, because there are other paradigms that are out there that have been talked about in science for more than 100 years. And back in 1980, physicist David Bohm said, in Wholeness and the Implicate Order, he writes, "What is primarily needed is a growing realization of the extremely great danger of going on with the fragmentary process of thought." And this extremely great danger is just so visible now. Just yesterday, I think they announced that the doomsday clock is now at is 89 seconds to midnight. It was 90 for the last 2 years. And so when I was starting to study climate change in the late 80s, I think it was about 6 minutes. When I was born, it was about 12 minutes. So we are getting very close. And that is why it might be a good time to challenge our ways of thinking. And so for me, who I've been working on climate change for like 35 years, and I'm just wondering, can insights from quantum physics and quantum social science inspire transformations that are not only rapid and effective, but equitable, ethical, and sustainable? And that brings us to like what actually matters. And I start with this decade matters, that the science tells us that we have very few years to actually reach our the Paris Agreement, the Sustainable Development Goals, the 2050 vision for biodiversity, et cetera. But beyond international agreements, it is the fact that the physical systems are changing rapidly. And this brings us to our beliefs, because our beliefs influence the perspectives that we take on the relationship between self and society, what we believe to be politically possible. And, they're subconscious, they're conscious, but all in all, it's really like, how much are we aware of our beliefs? And if we don't believe we can change, well, we probably won't. And in quantum physics, there are many different interpretations, and I won't go into those. But one of them, quantum Bayesianism or cubism, really looks at that. That reality is really it's called participatory realism, and it recognizes our beliefs actually create our reality that we're experiences. It's fundamentally about agency and about how we show up in the world and how we actually influence the systems. So what reality are we collapsing? And this brings us then to the idea of what is relationships. And essentially, I think many of our problems today are relationship problems. Whenever I give a talk about climate change as a relationship problem, I get mostly women showing up, and it's but I think that if we get down to the very the physics of it, relationships matter because our current worldview has been has represented a particular relationship. And what we know is that from quantum physics is that we are the system that we are trying to transform. And that, that it's not just about these like connected parts, but we are like intra-acting as part of a whole system. And this is very much in line with many spiritual traditions, embodied practices, and political movements that recognize that, the whole and the parts are connected. And this really is the idea of, thinking relationally about not just the problems, but also the solutions. And one of the relationships that I want to mention is entanglement. Because often people say, "Oh, well, entangled relationships as being twisted together or intertwined," but in quantum physics, it has a very specific meaning and definition, where separate particles, when one of them is measured, reveals information about the other. So there's no information passing between them, and Einstein called it spooky action at a distance. But it's not about causality, it's about correlation. And I think that is when we start to recognize that we are entangled through language, through meaning, through shared ideas, that we can start to think about that like we are all one whole. And so this is, this idea of non-locality, that what I do actually has an influence on the whole, can be very powerful for actually motivating and activating social change in our societies. And that brings us then to consciousness, because if we want to transform society at this incredible rate and scale and speed and depth that we're talking about, we have to recognize that consciousness matters. It's not just about hope. It's not just about, like wishing for things, but we need to consciously transform. And often people, there's many different definitions of what consciousness is, whether it just emerges from our brain or whether it is something that is fundamental to the universe. But consciousness actually does matter. And quantum social theorist Alexander Wendt, in his Quantum Mind and Social Theory book, really talks about us as walking wave functions that are entangled with each other. And the science is fascinating to follow because it's actually showing that quantum mind has a lot of evidence. But where I come from in the global change research community, we talk about the atmosphere, we talk about the biosphere, we talk about the cryosphere, hydrosphere, everything, but we don't talk about the noosphere, or this kind of shared the sphere of human consciousness and mental activity, especially in relationship to the biosphere. And so we don't necessarily see that we can consciously change. And when we leave that out, we overlook the collective and the transpersonal shared nature of human experiences, including not just with each other, but with other species and nature in general. And that brings us then to the important role of agency. And agency matters because, again, it's we're not going to just make these changes through just hoping for change. Someone has to do it. We need actions, we need interventions that challenge all of the outdated systems that are now actually leading to what we see in the world today. And here I draw on feminist philosopher and physicist Karen Barad's concept of agential realism, where she recognizes that we are constantly intra-acting with each other and with the environment and the universe. And she says our interactions matter because each one of them reconfigures the world. So I think that's a really important part of this, but it's not just agency in general, because agency has created a lot of the problems that we see in the world today. And people that have too much power and agency can create chaos, and they can be very cruel. And I don't even have to go into that. So what we're talking about is a quality of agency. A quality of agency that actually recognizes wholeness and is an expression of that wholeness, bringing together the values based on the values that are important to the whole, whether it's equity or compassion or dignity or sustainability. And so with our agency comes a responsibility for the norms, the rules, the standards, the regulations, and everything else that influences how society is organized and who benefits. And this includes, again, other species, other ecosystems, other generations, etc. So when it comes to quantum social change, I think that individual agency, collective agency, political agency, all of these are very much entangled. And this brings me then to the idea of that we are entangled through patterns, through creating new, you can say vibrations, new ways of doing things. And this is why fractals matter, because fractals are self-similar patterns that repeat themselves at every scale. And we see them in nature, we see them, we can create them in algebra and geometry, but we also see them in society. We see that society follows patterns, and that unlike in the social world, in the mathematical or natural world, our social fractals actually are based on values. They're based on the qualities and values that replicate at scale. So this is really how, metaphorically, quantum fractals are these non-local entangled patterns that influence the whole. And you can actually see fractal patterns at the subatomic level, which I think is very interesting. So in the classical world, where paradigm shifts can take a really long time, we have to wait for generations to die and everything. In the quantum world, in an entangled world, we actually can occupy the paradigm. We can inhabit it. We can create these new patterns. And it really shows that we matter in every moment. And I think, to me, that is the beauty of the potential and the possibility for social change exists right here and now. And each of us matters. And that brings us to the last part of that, you matter as a whole and part of an entangled quantum system. It's like I and we and our collective, what psychologist Dan Siegel calls it "we" as the pronoun. We relate, how we relate to ourselves, each other, nature, future generations, and systems in general really starts to actually make a difference in the world. So agency is entangled. We are affecting the whole at all times, and creating our individual and shared reality. And so that is where I think, quantum social change really is about recognizing this. And it's not just about the solutions aren't about technologies and behavioral changes, but it really lies in people, and it's expressed through the love for ourselves, the love for each other, love for nature, love for future generations. And to me, like that is when we start to put people at the center of social change and start to recognize that, the solutions are all of us, then I think it becomes really important. And this ties to the work that I've been doing on transformations to sustainability using the three spheres of transformation, which represent the practical, the political, and the personal. And I won't go into this right now, but what we're really trying to say is that all of these exist all together. This is, like that. When I change personally, I influence systems and structures. I influence all of the practical outcomes. And in terms of fractal agency, we start to see that when we can start to work from the values and the principles that we care about for the whole, when we can start to identify what is not working and shift those systems and cultures and create those results, then we start to move things in a different direction. So our outcomes for sustainability, then, we can all be doing very different things, but if they are very much aligned in the same direction and taking care of the whole, we start to see that all of us on this call here may be actually, doing different things, but contributing to this larger movement. And this is what I call it, You Matter movement. And when we spread it out to the world, people all over the place are doing this, and they don't necessarily have to be locally connected, but it's part of a larger shift that's going on in society. And we all have, when we're operating at the practical, political, and personal spheres, we have multiple spheres of influence. And this goes, kind of in this spiral here from the individual to your families and friends, to your networks and communities and neighborhoods and meta communities and urban, all the way up to, the global level, and also all Homo sapiens who have ever lived. So we are always influencing the whole. And that, I think, is where I get a lot of hope for social change, and not just hope, but wow, we can actually create a strategy that actually activates that sense of individual and collective agency for systems change, recognizing that we are always touching the world. We are always actually having that influence. And this, Tony Beardam drew this for the index of the book. And this is there's that blank one, the bottom middle one, and on the right, that, we can actually create that world that is thriving for everyone. It will take courage, and we have to step outside of the comfortable paradigms that we're in. But I think that moving out of our comfort zone, that is, I think many of us are already right there. And when we do, and when we start to actually see how we can touch the whole system and influence that, we recognize that we matter much more than we think. And so that was a very brief overview of the book and the follow-up work on fractal approaches. But I think that what I'd love to talk about today is really what does quantum social change and fractal agency mean in practice for you and your work? And then how do we put this to work for the whole so that we can actually have a thriving world for everybody? So I'm happy to answer any clarification questions or anything, but also it'd be just great to get into groups and discuss this. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Karen. I suggest we head into breakouts because there's probably lots and lots to talk about. And I'll open up some breakouts for now, maybe for 12 minutes, and then we come back. Karen, could you repeat the question that you're inviting people to reflect on in the breakouts?
Yeah, it really is bringing it home, because I can talk in theory, but what does this mean in, oops, oh yeah, I am not, I thought I was muted. What does it mean? What does quantum social change mean in practice for you and for your work? And how can we take these ideas and actually get them out there so that we can achieve a thriving world? So it really is what are we putting this into practice? What would it mean for you?
Wonderful. I'll just open up some breakouts. I hope you'll all enjoy the conversation. Looking forward to being in conversation all together once we get back. Yeah, I assumed. That's why I
Oh, we're back.
I think everyone's coming
We'll
back. Yeah.
connect after, Jay.
Great. Well, I hope everyone had good conversations. I had, yeah, really good questions and comments and ideas in our group. So if anyone wants to share anything about what does this actually look like in practice, I would love to hear it. And you just raise your hands, and then does anyone have anything to share? What yeah, okay, so Julia, yeah.
Yeah. Hi, so I'm Julia. I'm from Mongolia. I live in Zurich and I work in leadership development. So I'm realizing that I've been using kind of this for a while now in my personal and professional life, partly as an energy healer. So that idea of quantum, you said, what is it called? The correlation?
Quantum entanglement.
Quantum entanglement,
Mhm.
that's a whole premise on which the energy healing is based, on which I can kind of do energy healing even with people on the other end of the globe, right?
Mhm.
And so, and that's how I think we can sense each other's energies and share, kind of share the common field right now in this meeting. So that's been one way of kind of using it. The other way is trying to identify in that beautiful mandala that you showed, like, you know, the Fibonacci sequence patterns. I try to identify, I don't even try, I just follow my intuition to be guided to people who are the key kind of, you know, all of us are connected, but some are connected more than others, right? And so who are those people? And then going and supporting them in critical points in their lives. And they range from like a midwife in rural Germany to, you know, senior leadership of International Red Cross or whatever, right? So it's a whole gamut. So I found that it doesn't matter. It's like, it's important. We're all important. That's been my takeaway from this, as you said. We all matter.
Yeah, and seeing the other in you and things like that, and that is hard in some cases, you know, to actually practice that in a very in a world that is in so much like turmoil and chaos. But I think that what you were, you know, how do you work with it every day energetically and relationally is really like that's the crux of it. So,
Yeah, and in
great,
terms
thank
of,
you.
thank you. Just to add one quick thing from our group conversation was, we talked about how do we reconcile, how do we apply this to polarization that we see in the world, and we had a partner, Ilyana from Bulgaria, who was talking about this, you know, like Trump, the right wing, left wing, etc., that's happening everywhere, and you know, so my kind of personal answer to that was finding my own inner Trump, and you know, reconciling that polarization within myself, and then that opening the door to creating a space to reconcile it outside of myself, right?
Yeah, and that practice of connecting with people who don't see the world in the same way, I think that is what is, you know, people are always like, what does quantum social change mean in practice? And the conclusion is like practice matters too, you know, that we actually have to have practices and tools and ways to overcome, like to get out of our own way and to connect with people. So yeah, so thank you for sharing that. So those are great. John, you have your hand up.
John, you're still muted.
Right.
Yeah, now you're good.
Apologies for being late. The example is probably an organization that I work with whose purpose is really simple. It's a charity who wants wealthy people to do good with their money. So that's across the spectrum of capital, from philanthropy, social investment, right through to impact investing. So the network that's set up to achieve that is a network made up of professional advisors to private client high net worth individuals. So that's wealth managers, finance industry, tax, legal. So the whole finance industry is part of that network. The other part, though, is philanthropists and impact investors are also part of it. And so you have wealthy people. And then you have trusts and foundations and charities. So you have these multiple groups all working towards the same end. And the reach is international. So basically, because the finance industry is interrelated around the world, we are also have connections. So it was much better before COVID. So COVID, we had to pull back a bit, but we still have the international connections. And we have specialized training, and we get all these different players involved in the training. We have events with all the different players in the events. And what amazes me, we did a webinar just recently, and webinars is sort of a bit passe in some ways. We had 170 people show up at our webinar. And so these were again mixed for all these different groups and people from Hong Kong right through to US, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a worldwide network, and there's a whole range of different things that go on. But it basically, I think, fits what I think you're talking about. I missed the first part, so I'm sorry about that. But it's really important that you have multiple groups working together towards an end. So I just wanted to reinforce that with that one example, but there's other examples of as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a really important point because a lot of like what I think about like quantum social change, it really is about collaborative power. It is about the collective, the individuals and the collectives. You know, individuals are the collectives. We are the systems. How do we actually mobilize and act to in the political sphere to how do we organize society in a way that works for everybody? And in our group, it also came up that that's like we're in a very like tough political time and systems change. How do we change these systems? And it kind of reminds me of like Buckminster Fuller. You create a new system, you generate these patterns, new patterns that then can actually take over from the old ones. And I think that's where we need lots of good examples and all these fractals of change, and also an awareness of when we start to fragment. And like I live in Norway, where we think that like, okay, we're very green and everything, but in many of our policies are actually very fragmenting for the world including energy policies. So it is like that awareness of like, how do we take the whole into account as we move forward?
And I think it's important to get the companies involved. So it's just not individuals, but it's corporations, and also
Yeah.
we work with government, different government departments, but also the regulators. So everyone who has some kind of play in this whole area is part of this network to do good with.
Right.
So it's really neat stuff.
And I think and I think you make an important point because it's not just, it's like everyone matters, but it's like when we connect who we are with what we do and how we show up, then we have that, that creates the coherent integrated pattern rather than like for the fragmented pattern within us. So
but it's important around the emphasis on values-based discussions because it really pushes what this is all about. More of it.
Great. Yes.
Quiet now. Thanks.
Thanks, Alyssa. And I saw somebody, it was Buckminster Fuller, who was talking about like creating new systems. And he showed back in like the 1970s that like that is possible to create a world that works for all. And so, yeah, important. So Alyssa.
Yeah. So the question I've been sort of grappling with, and I thought I would just put it out to the group since listening, and thank you, Karen, is I work with mostly social change leaders, social justice leaders in the States, a few from other countries, mostly English-speaking countries. And there's a tension between this practice of starting where there are aligned, or at least enough of an Venn diagram of aligned values and common beliefs, and having some sense of boundary around that and creating a fractal, but at the same time, the sense of belonging and everyone is supposed to be included or feel included, and every community is supposed to be permeable to everyone else. So there's a tension there that I'm wondering how you hold, or how the theory holds. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. And I think that that gets into like quantum is like particles and waves. It's like both and, that you can be an individual and a collective, but it doesn't mean that you're just merged always in the collective, so that you can have these like be a coherent individual and a part of the whole. So it's really a different way of thinking about things. And then and those tensions will always come up then of like, oh, where are the boundaries? How do I relate to this? And going into like the values, when we talk about these values, I've had a lot of discussion, academic discussions about what are universal values and things, but it's not like when you talk about equity, I have to just like work from the idea that equity applies to everybody, nobody excluded. But you don't, if I work with many people who don't care about equity, but I can't exclude them because, like by definition. So it's like having compassion for people who are not compassionate. It's not to say that everyone has these values, but that they apply to everyone and to all, you could say extended to all species. So how do I work from, the values that are important to me are like oneness and integrity and full potential and equity and things. And how do I be that and ground myself in that when I have conversations with the people who are, maybe not so interested in climate change or biodiversity or justice or things. And so it really is that, where do you find that connection point? What they care about for everyone. And sometimes, you have to bring it down to, like almost like it's really opening the inquiry. Like, what do you really care about? Not just, they might say like my family. Oh, you care about the well-being of young people. All of, like getting people to be able to see themselves in a bigger picture, I think, is part of those generative conversations.
Mm-hmm. So then how do we create so is that a part of creating a collective fractal around the set of overlapping, Venn diagram of values with that person? Right? If a collective is also supposed to be embodying.
Yeah, but I think that collectives will always have the tension. So it's like we're all part of the collective. So how do I, when that tension comes up, what's my role? And that's where, like the practice, the facilitation, there's, how do we create those spaces where we can actually be those? I mean, it's a really great question, and why it's, being human is hard. It's like, wow, how do we show up as individuals and collectives and get out of ourselves? And when I think about like when we talk about these fractals, they'll always be very context specific and unique to each. So we're not asking for, it's not like the putting a McDonald's chain everywhere. It's not about the replication of everything, but it's the pattern. So, it might look different in different places and to different people, but if the alignment for these larger goals of, like a equitable, just all the, things that are very much embedded in many international agreements already, like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and things. So there's really reminding ourselves that we are already part of the whole. We don't have to try to be, we are. And then to like that we are entangled, and then to work together to design, like to create that world. So yeah, so these are good questions. They're not like, I wish I have more questions than answers. So that's why it's been an ongoing inquiry for me to say like, okay, what does this mean in practice? And that's why it's really fun to talk to you and hear about this. So
Yeah, thank you.
Alina.
I won't ask my next question, but I was going in the direction of, so then how do we be an aligned movement together? And I know that shifts over time, but so I will pose that and not expect a response.
Yeah. But I think the question is always then like, what tools do we have? What's our toolbox, and how do we practice it every day? Because we're always going to get new things coming up at us. So great.
To me, this is
So,
particularly interesting because we're also a sector that is very intentional about change, and we are working on a certain area of change, maybe in climate or other very specific areas, but realizing that through how we work and what we do, actually we're also influencing different patterns. I think that's what makes it interesting, not just where we are intentional about the change. And at times I see that our being intentional about one part of change is like we don't see the other elements where we're contributing non-intentionally. And from what you were sharing, for me, it was very linked with all this unexpected impact in a way, and invisible layers of impact, because we're always very clear of our impact where we see other people in the groups that we're working with, but we're not so clear of our impact through the patterns we create or enforce or reject at certain points. And I think that applies to non-change makers as well. I mean, it applies to, let's say, the technology industry, which is creating a lot of unintended change through the platforms that they're having. And we also have a lot of things that we create that we might not be aware. And I think that we were using also in PEX a lot this idea of fractal agency, exactly to look at our power to influence through the practices, to the patterns in practice, not just through the kind of conscious change-making tools.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and that's why we do need to be adaptive and have path corrections and mattering in the moment, that it's like again and again and again, and like, because, we're always affecting the whole, and, we may not, in some ways, I think that, like we often don't, now we're quite aware that we're influencing the global environment, but we don't see how our actions actually are part of the bigger solutions as well. But sometimes helping people to make the invisible visible is good, to see that, like, oh, actually this is having an enormous impact on Norwegian land use or whatever. So it's really, you raise really important points there. Carola, I guess we have a few more minutes left.
Yes, thank you. Really interesting for me, the framework, and I think there are two main action point where I see it really disruptive in a way. One is an impact measurement and management system that is all about attribution and the individual attribution, and fractal agency is exactly the opposite. So and I'm thinking how much new framework of trying to evaluate quality of relationship and so on could be very meaningful in terms of impact assessment. The other point is on the timeline, on the length, on the time horizon for this kind of change, and there I have really problems with the old system of media, how it is, so that really drives us into a pessimism. I was reading an article a couple of days ago about pessimism in Europe is really exploding everywhere, and because we lose track of the change we are part of, no, with these. So just this couple of comments.
Yeah, no, but those are and I like, often we just think that, like, oh, it takes forever to change in the personal sphere, and then the system take longer, and let's focus on the like behavioral changes and technologies. But from this perspective, where like the quantum perspective, I draw on Monica Sharma's work a lot, where she's emphasizing like those values, and it's an acausal space, where we are already connected, and it's not like a mental space, but it's really like a heartfelt space. And so when we can, like that, when we actually are like in that, like creating those fractals, mattering in the moment, then, then we are actually like the change can happen a lot faster than we think. And that, I think people are underestimating the potential that we have collectively for social change. And also, just kind of stretching it out, like this is the way it's going, instead of thinking of these non-linear, non-local changes. And that's where, where I think that, like, I would hate to have future generations look back and think that, oh, they just didn't get that they were one. They didn't get that they were entangled. They didn't. And I hear this again and again from Indigenous leaders and members who are just like that. Like, this is really, like, it's time for us to learn these things. And I think that's why, coming from like the science community, I think quantum physics just should be opening up our minds and opening up an inquiry into what it means for society. So those were, yeah, thank you. And Neama, I said that correctly.
Yes, hello. I just want to add something about the values. When Elisa, I think, talked about how can we align collective values, maybe we need to look at how each community interpret the value itself. Because, for example, compassion in Asia, in Asian communities, is different than compassion in African communities, or even, let's say, in Europe. Across contexts, it's different. Across age groups is also different. Respect for the youth, for teenagers, or even like young professionals is different than respect for the elderly. So when we write the meaning of each value, what does it mean to us, and we foster this communication of our interpretations, I think this is the role of maybe schools or universities, I don't know, but this would like through a mediator or a facilitator, it can help in aligning these collective values, which, as you said, like at the end of the day, they would contribute to the whole. So this is just
yeah, it's a really important point that values are very context specific. And so I teach a course on on environment and society. We focus on climate change, and the first class last week, you have them like, what do you care deeply about, not just for yourself but for everyone? And then we put them on the board, so it comes out with respect, altruism, all these things. And then we just say that these are the values that we as a group have and hold, and so they are our collective values that will travel with us through the semester. And I think sometimes, like, it's not that we all have to agree on them, but we have to say we all care. They're very similar to each other in that they they're like, oh, peace, justice, these things that you start to realize that our collective actually has a whole nice coherent set of values that could create a very powerful fractal of change.
But they need to be translated into concrete examples. So
yeah, and
what
then
do
asking,
they
like,
mean
what
by
does
peace? Let's say, what do they mean?
Yeah. And someone said, freedom. I said, what does freedom mean to you? And this was a student from the United States, and then we had to talk about that, like in freedom and responsibility and things. So you're absolutely right in that it opens up, like, asking people, what do you care about and why, and what do you mean? And things. So it's a great conversation starter.
I just want to quickly notice the time that I imagine. Usually in our sessions, many people have to leave on the hour, so we understand, and we thank you for being here, and most importantly, we thank you, Karen, for the beautiful conversation. And as usual, we are doing a little bit our afterglow. So for anyone who feels called to stay longer and wants to be a little bit more in deeper conversation, please stay around. Karen has kindly offered to stay for another 15 or so minutes. And for everyone who has to go, thanks so much for being here. It's lovely to be in conversation with you all. And we will post the notes as usual in our note document, and I'll put the thing again in the chat. And we wish you all a good and healthy rest of your day. And for anyone else who wants to stay, please stay for more conversation.
Thank you.
Fabian, I have a question. If we're gonna keep going, that's okay. And Karen, sorry, I'm looking at Fabian and Karen at the same time. Hi, Karen. Sue Snyder from the Equality Fund based in Canada. Karen, we adopt a kind of a fractals approach to change, in the sense that we move money to activists and movements around the world working to move the yardsticks on gender equality. And We really believe that this network of activists and movements working in local contexts, but starting to get connected together regionally and globally, is really a critical element of change, particularly in a space like gender equality that's long-term. Just so many elements go into the complexity of that type of change process. But it's incredibly hard to work with other funding partners to change the way that money and power moves, because money does not want to move in that way. And when I say money, it can be philanthropic and government, and we're kind of sandwiched. So we're a partner through which other donors and governments can move money in the ways that we collectively want to move money. But it's really hard. Money likes to move thematically. Money likes to move, in particular regional contexts. It doesn't like to be, or the perception is it doesn't like to be kind of spread around in fractals. And I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit about your thinking around that, or any advice that you have around frameworks and thinking of trying to bridge some of like how money likes to flow and and an element of change that I don't think is really getting the support that it could in terms of how change is happening.
Well, that's a great question. I think many are asking that because, when I was asked for the example of like a fractal in practice in our group, and I gave the example of the National Maasai Conservancy in Kenya, which, is part of our transformative change assessment. When I learned about it, it's like they're really, it's based on coexistence and dignity. They're doing great work. And their barrier then is financial money, because all the money is flowing to the big scalable things and not the small fractals of change. And it's very hard to get the development agencies to shift and change that mind, and to get the to get that funding. And so that often the whole finance system and money flows is a barrier to change, and that serves it serves to like maintain the status quo in many ways. So yeah, I think like I have probably as many questions in terms of how do we do that, but I know that like people have written about quantum economics and how do we think about money differently, so yeah, what do you think is the like if you had to say like what the solution would be for, because I think that's a question that probably all of us have, is like how do we put more money, and that was one thing also that came out in the in this transformative change assessment, like how large the subsidies are for destroying nature, and how like very little money goes to the conservation of nature. So, and the point isn't like to just get more money, but it's to actually change the financial, like the flows, the way it's organized. So fractal agency requires fractal funding. That's a really good solution from Marie.
Yeah, I mean, I think I could just speak personally and then I'll let others speak. I think part of our challenge is that we feel like we're moving money in the right way.
Let me just just a second. I just have to get my these are dead now, I think.
Okay.
Let's see.
Can you hear okay, Karen?
Yeah, now I can hear you. Yes.
Check. Okay. I think part of the challenge is we feel like we're moving money in the right ways, right? We're moving money in ways into local contexts where change is happening, often in marginalized or fragile contexts that are not linked into the broader systems, and working to like link them in and create power and influence in that way. I think part of the challenge that we have is that we feel like we're moving money in the right way, that change is happening, but trying to tell a cohesive story of change is hard, right? So it's a bit of a disconnect between how we're moving the money, but our ability to tell the story of like a cohesive story of change. So I think, Karen, that's why I really appreciated some of your framing, because we're always trying to grapple with how to frame change that is happening through movements, some of the tipping points between incremental and exponential change that happens through movement modalities, but that are often disconnected around the world. So
yeah, and we don't see
tell the story of change when it's inside of a geographic context or within a specific community. It's much harder when you've got 1,000 partners around the world doing 1,000 different things, but all moving in the same direction. But it's hard to capture that, I guess.
Yeah. And that is where, when people say we need new stories, we need new metaphors, and there's a chapter in the book, Metaphors Matter, like that this is like how we talk about this. And then, like where it's, like to be able to actually, it's very hard to like attribute, oh, these results are because of this or because of this, because we live in such a complex world. But to get the narratives from people who have felt, like who have been doing the work, I think that's a really powerful way. And yeah, but the how do you move the money in that global situation? Yeah, I think that's if we can come up with that cohesive narrative, that would be a really good start. And yeah, just show how where the money goes. But I think whether we're talking about research, education, everything, what we see right now is money, the concentration of money in the hands of a few, where we have to feed the fractals.
I wanted to come in after this conversation and this comments to really amazing points that you're making, and it's resonating so much on the call. How we're not managing somehow to move funding where it's needed, and I love the concept of fractal funding. Maybe this is something we need to work on. Something I'm wondering about, I'm deeply inspired by this theory, and I think that it's fundamentally right. And just intuitively, we all feel it is right. Just we're trying to understand and trying to figure out how to speed it up, what are the ways actually to get there, and how we can support each other on this journey. Narrative change and telling a cohesive story is very important, and I think that we're missing that. And I wanted to add to this that we're also missing a story of a long-term change we want to see. I'm working a lot on futures and foresight, and this is, I don't know, maybe in quantum physics this is different, and you will have a different take. And I would love to hear, Karen, what you think about this. But usually to activate a movement, to activate agency, we always need a goal, right? We need something on which we focus, because every day we're just surrounded by so many choices we need to make on a personal, individual, organizational level, the same for capital, so many choices that surround us. And we need to focus on the essential choices. Where do we focus our energy? And with long-term change and any issues you touched upon, gender or climate crisis, they're long-term issues, very much entangled, and we will not achieve change just in over a few days or even a year. So it's very much longitudinal, and this end in mind needs to be broken down. We need to understand what are the goals, how do we actually get there, how do we achieve this, and what is this ultimate vision we want to achieve, not just sustainability or just society. What does it actually mean? And we know that this is very much contextual. What kind of visions are there? How can we contribute to these visions? And is it the part also of the theory that you're describing, Karen, this kind of giving the direction, like this is where we should focus, this is where we should get the funding, this is where we will achieve the change?
Yeah, I think that that those are like the idea that like that there's no one answer, and that that if you look at transformations as a process and think about like, okay, what are the pathways that we're going to take on, what are the possibilities, what are the potentials, and in this assessment we did, we just there was an assessment of like 800 visions from all over, and there's like what ones are, and there's so many different visions. It could be like the donut economy, circular economy, degrowth, all there's, and two very spiritual visions for how we should be together. And I think all of these are they motivate certain groups in certain directions. But then when we kind of like just say, okay, what are the common themes that we want to be like aligned on, so that we're all like we're not going all over the place. And we tend to do this with, like, I know I do with like all different projects that are fragmented. How do we create a coherent strategy to move us in this, so that we get those, like, what do we do now and now and now and next and things. And I think that that's to get to that, like, like you can say, oh, we matter in the moment and things, but we have to actually move the needle on things, and we need to actually design differently for cultures and systems and those types of changes. So, and that's where the work I do on like transformational leadership and working with the three spheres of transformation and transformational results change, Monica Sharma's work from radical transformational leadership, like that gives us lots of different tools and templates. And, you know, how do we create a synergistic operational strategy for the whole so that we are all like supporting that movement, like the, you know, creating the ecosystem for a healthy and thriving world. Because right now, like, and it's not a naive kind of thing, like we are, because we are having losses right now, and that's why when, you know, we talk about a sustainable future, but we need, there's a lot of people who are losing, who are, you know, there's a lot of losses that are occurring right now and you know, every day. So how do we hold all that and move us in a different direction? And that's where it's the quality of agency, it's how we show up, it's how we connect, not just with ourselves, with each other. And it goes back into the relational dimensions. And when I have to say, like, the good news that's happening is like the relational perspective is gaining a lot of ground. And just, you know, I just edited a textbook that I published in 2019 with a colleague, and by 2023 it was already outdated because the ecocentric approach is becoming so much more popular. So is, you know, like the you know, like climate emotions and things. There's a lot of things that are being talked about now that weren't 5 years ago, and I think we sometimes ignore that. But the you know, like the UN Declaration on Indigenous rights of Indigenous peoples and things. There, we are making progress in some areas, and how do we actually bring it to other areas? So it's you know, it's like, how do we hold the whole and the parts together? And that is, I think, the art of like, you know, like the fractal approach is to actually be a pattern generator and to be self-aware and conscious when we're creating fragments, or when I'm creating fragments. So, right. But it's a conversation that, yeah, like, how do you strategize to do, like, because we are talking about whole systems change and rapid. Does anyone else have any?
I have a thought. Hello, Karen. Thank you for the session today. I am also an academic and have studied what I call network leadership, but it's essentially the same ideas of what you're talking about, of showing up differently and investing in relationships and being humble despite whatever we bring to the table, knowing that there are all these other pieces that we need to engage and build community with in order to make headway on these issues. And a lot of the conversation, Sue's question and Fabian's background in building communities, it occurs to me, even all of these Wasan calls that we have, we're bringing together like-minded people. Maybe there's a way, in addition to the stories, that we could come up with some type of a manifesto that all of us sign that embody these values that can help make the case to others, right? Because I know I've been documenting stories over and over again, but it's I think a lot of the powers that be, the funders, who controls the resource flows, don't necessarily read a story and say, oh, okay, now I'll change the way I do it. But if they saw other credible people, and we always have such incredible people on our calls, and we all believe in the same approach, regardless of what we call it, that maybe there might be a way to move the needle faster, because you had all these legitimate, credible people who have experience in the field, or just all of these different experiences that might help make the case, whether it was published in Foundation Review or Stanford Social Innovation, whatever, or multiple places, to say this is kind of what we all believe in. Because I am seeing a pattern that we all are kind of preaching to the choir, and I would love to find ways to help make the case more broadly, because that's what I've been trying to do as an individual.
Yeah, no, I'm totally on board, because that's what I really think, like, oh, I want to, like, a you matter movement, not in a traditional movement sense, but it's almost like what one friend says, like shape shifting the noosphere, you know, actually shifting the way we see ourselves in relation to change, and to create that larger movement. How do we do that? And I think, you know, the stories are so important, but people are really driven by results too. Like, oh, I actually see that this is having, and so how do we actually show what you know, like what matters in, what matters in practice and how that does. So it is, I think, but even if we're, like whatever manifests, if we can tell that story of what's possible and the potential and really shift the narrative that has been so dominant in our heads that we are like just individuals and this is the way it is. And there's a real power in having, there's, like the Paulo Freire's, like a united people is very dangerous to those, to the few who have a lot of power. So how do we, maintain that coherence when there are deliberate efforts to fragment and break up and yeah, so I'm with you. I think that is and I think like academics have to be able to think how to do research not as usual but as unusual, how to get out of the like make show a different type of relevance in society.
Definitely. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jane. Any other comments, questions, or? And
maybe I'll just make a comment. I think part of the opportunity is to help different actors or fractals locate themselves in a bigger story or picture. And I think that's what excites me. I think, Karen, some of your visuals were really compelling because it located something in a bigger story or a bigger system. Even when you showed the one of all these tiny fractals, right, inside of various kind of circles of influence or systems that they're working in. So I think those of us in the, philanthropy sector, or sometimes we're referred to as, I forget all the different names that we have for like intermediary type organizations. I think part of the value we can offer to this work is helping to make the invisible visible. Like those of us that have kind of this perspective on, the different fractals that are out there in the world and helping to create a picture, even though they aren't connected, they're not fractals that are connected day to day and talking to each other, but they're connected in the sense that we're all working together towards a future, a better future. So something to think about.
Yeah. And that's where, when you go on and you say like, oh, it's not just up to me, it's up to all of us. And then that there are like, wow, there are so many people who are working on this, who are creating these little fractals, and to recognize that everybody matters, and that a lot of the changes come from, like the most unexpected places as well, that everyone is part of a system. And so we all have our spheres of influence. And I think that, changing that meta narrative so that we can, see our, and that goes into, Karen Barad's work on agential realism and her meeting the university halfway. It's like how do we, and even, all the work on that is like, how do we find a home in the universe, our home in the universe? How do we feel that we are part of this bigger picture? And I think that, and many physicists have, like taken a very mystical turn in their lives and like those big questions become, like what is the meaning of life and all that, and that it connects us all to go that like, oh yeah, we matter. And one scientist journalist, John Horgan, was saying like humans are matter that yearns to matter. And I think that when we can start to see ourselves in a big picture, and that in the end, it might take time before we actually, with all the momentum of the system, but we will be remembered by future generations for sure, and that we will matter to them. And yeah.
I can add just one thing, Karen, just a reflection and a learning on our side, because we brought your theory and this thing to the PEX forum. Jane was part of this of this forum. Alina, many colleagues on this call, James. And we utterly failed in actually explaining the theory. So I remember like me, Alina, just on this red couch, fractal agency, and we can save the world, and it's amazing what we can do with that. And then the community, what is that? It's like, they didn't get us. The response was a wonderful response in the end. Like we've learned from this so much, because towards the end of the forum, they kind of said, okay, we just do not understand this. It seems to be cool, interesting, but what does it actually mean? So they just started reading and came up with this broccoli metaphor. So they started to kind of relate, okay, so this is how it works. And then everyone was, okay, now I got it.
Mhm.
And in this call, I had the feeling that I was looking into the eyes of some people and I could see still, what is that? What is that about? How do you relate to this? And I'm wondering, how can we tell the story indeed better so people can relate and understand?
Mhm.
I don't have an answer, but this is a failure story of our own.
Yeah, but I think you're absolutely right, and I get a lot of people, and I've had like feedback from people to say, I didn't understand what you said, but the artwork spoke to me. I understand entanglement through that, and I think that there's we have different ways, and my mother's always just don't use the word quantum, Karen. I just keep that out and things. But I've in working with Monica Sharma for 15 years, my first reaction was to retrofit it onto everything I knew already, and and take it as a framework for understanding rather than the three spheres rather than a framework for action. And I've done, I don't know how many workshops with her, and every time it lands differently. And what she calls it's like the fractals of change there. And that's where I was like, yes, now I get it, that, when you just start to see the world as just vibrations and patterns, and that we are relationships of things. And then and then to actually translate that into our very classical world where, ice melts at certain temperatures and, things burn, like that. How do we actually navigate on that edge of the both and world, and to be able to think about what patterns can I shift? And it gets down to the very personal everyday things in terms of what I eat, what I do, but then it's into my job. What do I say yes to? What do I say no to? What do we fund? What do we not fund? What do we, how am I perpetuating the system? And that can lead to very uncomfortable decisions too, of no, okay, this is not the place for me anymore. Where would I, yeah, I think there's a lot of things that it's kind of it is the full package, because it is, as Donella Meadows says, the paradigm shift influences our paradigms influence everything about systems, including ourselves. So yeah.
Yeah, for me, one very concrete way of living it in daily life, based on the systems work that I've done with various groups, is listening to the voice of dissent. So, for example, if let's say 9 people agree on a point, and they see something in a certain way, and one person has a completely different idea, our usual tendency is what's wrong with him or her, right? Why don't they get it? And it's shifting that attitude to what is it that this person sees that we cannot see, right? How is they experience different? Which part of the blind spot in the system are they giving voice to, right? So that has helped me personally a lot, as well as my clients, in terms of kind of, instead of getting into this polarized, conflicted situation, and sometimes even taking certain voices of dissent in a very personal way. It's an attack on my idea, on my project, or my initiative. Instead, to kind of look at it as, oh, this person just represents a voice in our system that we need to attend to, because it is our system and everyone belongs to us and we belong to everyone. So it is one system. And so that's a really key shift that is sometimes can be quite challenging as well. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's a beautiful way to put it. And then it's often when people complain, they have a really strong commitment behind that. And it's often very similar, but they are actually saying wait a minute, this isn't working, or whatever. So that is, right. And I was reminded when you said that of people working on healing trauma, that if you think of us as one large system, there's a lot of people in the system are not able to, we have trauma that just keeps keeps lots of us quiet. So how do we get to unleashing, healing collective trauma, climate trauma, etc., and really activating, going on, all systems go for social change. And so I think that's the work that you're doing is how do you help to like move the whole.
I just also have a reflection on this idea of time and this being a good ancestor, which more and more comes around me. So it is somewhere developing in the system, and I think it will help us a lot to take this frame as well. And I talked before about visibility. I think we're looking a lot at what is visible and not looking at this all systems that the drawings show. And this different generations was also inspiring back forward, so not just who we influence directly, because if you say relationship approach, I think many people imagine directly networks or things where we see people connected, and that's part of the story, definitely, but there is the part of how we connect to the future, how we connect to nature, and all of these other elements that somehow we don't hold them on a daily basis, these links, this visibility of links. And if we could bring this lens, like you see the systems that sometimes use this metaphor of like a, in the movies where you see the, we want to go in a museum and you see the red links because you have those lenses, and it's kind of the same way looking in the world and seeing these connections that are invisible. And I think that and also towards the future, I think that would be amazing that we get more of this, the work like yours, and through this reflections.
Yeah, and what you're describing really is like experiential, not necessarily like how do we get people to feel and to experience the connections with, water and air and things, because we're just kind of, we walk around almost like heads on sticks, like getting busy and doing things, and it is like that, so there are so many tools, as Julia was talking about, like that, how to really engage relationally and from a sense of wholeness and things. So,
Well, I have the pleasure to come to an end, to close our call. Karen, you've inspired all of us. Believe me, believe us, and I see everyone nodding.
Well, likewise, you've inspired me too. I'm going to I can go and prepare my next lecture on climate science.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us. We'll be ordering books and reading even more in depth. And I think that what we're taking away, how we can really experience also the change that you just mentioned. How can we create this bigger story and feel this story, not just tell the intellectual discourse. It is important, but also really creating the stories of how does it feel, and through art and music and food, and also contributing to this bigger story. Thank you so much. Thank you, Fabian, for being such a wonderful host, for inviting us to co-host the session together as Wasan and PAX. It's been really incredible. It's such a gift. And thank you, everyone, for having joined and stayed so long. Thank you for such thoughtful comments and such a great discussion. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. Really pleasure. You all matter so much. Great.
Thanks. Thanks to you. Bye.
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 Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Well done. Great person, and